Chosen one, your royal power has been activated. Everything changes now. There are moments in personal growth when language reaches for symbols to describe something internal that does not yet have a simple name. Words like royal, power, and activation are not meant to suggest dominance over others or a sudden supernatural elevation. They point to a shift in self-authority, responsibility, and coherence. When your inner structure strengthens enough to guide your choices consistently, life begins to respond differently. Not because the world changed overnight, but because the way you move through it has changed. Everything changes now does not mean instant perfection or effortless outcomes. It means the pattern you were operating from has matured, and that maturity begins to shape how you decide, how you respond, and how you carry yourself in ordinary moments. Stay with this message until the very end, because each layer builds on the one before it, and deeper understanding unfolds gradually. And write your warmest wishes in the comments, and include the number 144 as a conscious act of intention and energetic focus. This moment represents a chapter where intention meets consistency, where inner clarity stabilizes momentum, and where attention strengthens what is already forming. This is the only place where wishes are mentioned, because from here forward, the focus shifts fully to awareness, responsibility, and embodied direction. Now, chosen one, press the hype button, like this video, subscribe if you haven't subscribed to the channel, and let's start. Royal power, in a grounded sense, is not about control, entitlement, or superiority. It is about self-governance. It is the ability to regulate your reactions, honor your values consistently, and make decisions that reflect long-term clarity rather than short-term impulse. When this kind of power activates, your nervous system becomes steadier, your thinking becomes cleaner, and your behavior becomes more aligned with what you actually respect in yourself. This is why change begins internally, long before it becomes visible externally. Activation does not arrive with fireworks. It arrives as coherence. You may notice that you no longer tolerate what once drained you. You pause before reacting, instead of being pulled into automatic patterns. You choose rest when your body signals need, rather than pushing through exhaustion to prove something. These are not small changes. They indicate that leadership has shifted inward. You are no longer governed by old reflexes alone. Everything begins to change because your standards change. You start holding yourself to a different level of honesty, consistency, and care. This does not mean perfection. It means accountability without punishment. You correct course sooner. You listen to feedback without collapsing. You make adjustments without dramatizing them. This steadiness compounds over time. One of the clearest signs that this activation is real is how you experience time. Urgency softens. You stop rushing to validate your worth through speed or accumulation. You begin valuing depth over volume, sustainability over intensity. This does not slow progress. It stabilizes it. Stable progress outlasts dramatic bursts of effort. You may also notice that your tolerance for chaos decreases. Environments that once felt normal now feel overstimulating or draining. Conversations that circle endlessly without resolution feel less appealing. You naturally gravitate toward clarity, structure, and calm. This is not withdrawal. It is refinement. Your system has learned what alignment feels like and seeks to preserve it. Another shift occurs in how you relate to authority. You rely less on constant external reassurance. You trust your own lived experience more. You still remain open to learning, but you are no longer easily swayed by noise, pressure, or comparison. This internal authority does not isolate you. It anchors you. Royal power also expresses itself through restraint. You do not need to dominate conversations, prove intelligence, or win every disagreement. You choose silence when it preserves clarity. You choose engagement when it serves purpose. This selectivity protects energy and strengthens focus. Your emotional responses may also feel different. You still feel deeply, but emotions move through you rather than directing you. Recovery time shortens. You stabilize faster after stress. This emotional efficiency preserves mental clarity and reduces unnecessary exhaustion. Another important change is how you experience responsibility. Responsibility no longer feels heavy or punishing. It feels clarifying. You understand what is yours to carry and what is not. You stop absorbing emotions, expectations, and problems that do not belong to you. This boundary clarity frees energy for what actually matters. As this activation integrates, you may notice that habits reorganize naturally. You gravitate toward routines that support focus and stability. You release patterns that create friction without benefit. This is not forced discipline. It is alignment shaping behavior. You may also experience a refinement of ambition. Ambition becomes less about proving worth and more about fulfilling coherence. You still care about growth, but you are not willing to sacrifice stability for speed. You recognize that sustainable momentum matters more than dramatic acceleration. Another sign of this shift is improved discernment around effort. You recognize which actions create meaningful impact and which merely create the appearance of productivity. This efficiency reduces burnout and increases satisfaction. Communication also changes. You speak more simply and more honestly. You listen without absorbing unnecessary emotional charge. Conversations become clearer because you are no longer speaking from insecurity or urgency. You express from grounded clarity. As internal structure strengthens, creativity often increases. With less internal noise, ideas flow more freely. Problem-solving becomes calmer and more adaptive. You see patterns more clearly. You may also notice a quieter confidence emerging, not performative or loud, but steady. You trust your direction without needing constant validation. This confidence supports consistency and resilience. Another important development is how you respond to setbacks. Instead of personalizing them or spiraling into doubt, you treat them as feedback. You adjust without collapsing emotionally. This adaptability preserves momentum even when conditions are imperfect. You may also become more selective with your commitments. You recognize that every yes carries responsibility. You protect your energy more intentionally. This selectivity strengthens quality of output and relationships. Royal power is also reflected in humility. You recognize growth without inflating identity. You acknowledge learning without diminishing confidence. This balance keeps you grounded while continuing to expand. As this activation stabilizes, complexity begins to feel more manageable. Not because life simplifies, but because your internal structure can hold more without fragmentation. You break problems into workable parts. You respond methodically rather than emotionally. You may also notice that your sense of purpose becomes quieter but more stable. You are no longer searching for meaning in dramatic ways. Meaning expresses itself through how you show up consistently, how you treat others, and how you honor your values in small decisions. Another shift is increased comfort with pauses. Stillness no longer feels like stagnation. Silence no longer feels threatening. You understand rhythm. You allow recovery to support clarity. Your relationship with rest also matures. Rest becomes restoration rather than escape. You rest to sustain alignment, not to avoid responsibility. This balance supports long-term stability. You may notice that inner dialogue becomes kinder and more realistic. Extremes of self-judgment soften. Inflated expectations normalize. You operate from grounded assessment rather than emotional extremes. As reliability strengthens internally, trust strengthens externally. People experience you as steadier, clearer, and more consistent. This does not require performance. It emerges naturally from coherence. Everything begins to change not because you gained power over others, but because you gained stewardship over yourself. That stewardship compounds into clarity, consistency, and influence over time. As this first part settles, understand this. Activation is not an event you wait for. It is a pattern you live into. Royal power is self-governance practiced daily. And when that governance stabilizes, life responds with greater coherence, opportunity, and responsibility, not through spectacle, but through steady, meaningful change. As this activation continues to settle into your daily life, you may begin to notice that your sense of direction feels quieter but more stable. You are no longer driven by emotional spikes, external pressure, or the need to constantly prove movement. Instead, you operate from a grounded inner reference point. Decisions feel less dramatic and more deliberate. You are not reacting to the world as much as you are responding to it with intention. This shift may feel subtle at first, but its long-term impact is profound. One of the earliest changes many people experience after this kind of inner activation is a refinement of priorities. What once felt urgent may now feel optional. What once felt insignificant may now feel essential. This reordering is not random. It reflects values clarifying and internal leadership strengthening. You begin to invest energy where it actually produces stability, growth, and meaning, rather than where it merely creates distraction or temporary relief. You may also notice that your relationship with effort transforms. Effort no longer feels like a battle against yourself. It becomes cooperation with your own clarity. You still apply discipline, but it feels supportive rather than restrictive. You stop forcing productivity for the sake of appearance. You start choosing actions that create real impact, even if they are quieter or slower than what you once chased. Another important shift occurs in how you experience boundaries. You no longer see boundaries as walls that isolate you or rules that limit you. You experience them as structures that protect what matters. Saying no becomes easier because you understand what your yes truly costs. This clarity reduces resentment and overextension. You begin to respect your own capacity instead of constantly pushing beyond it. Your emotional system also becomes more regulated. You still feel deeply, but emotions no longer dominate your behavior. You recover faster after stress. You stabilize sooner after disappointment. You respond more thoughtfully during conflict. This emotional efficiency conserves mental energy and supports better decision-making. It also strengthens relationships because communication becomes less reactive and more grounded. As self-governance strengthens, you may notice that old patterns begin to lose their grip. Habits rooted in fear, scarcity, or overcompensation feel less compelling. You are no longer pulled into automatic responses as easily. When a familiar trigger appears, you recognize it sooner and choose differently. This is one of the clearest signs that real change is taking place. Your sense of time may also shift. You stop feeling chronically behind or pressured to rush every outcome. You become more patient without becoming passive. You recognize that consistency compounds more reliably than urgency. This perspective reduces anxiety and increases confidence in your process. Another development is how you relate to control. You stop trying to manage every variable. You trust the systems you have built within yourself. You trust your ability to adapt when conditions change. This flexibility reduces stress and increases resilience. You are no longer rigid in your expectations, but you remain firm in your values. You may also notice that your communication becomes clearer and more concise. You speak with less excess and more intention. You listen without absorbing unnecessary emotional weight. Conversations feel cleaner because you are no longer communicating from insecurity or urgency. You express from grounded clarity. As this stability deepens, your tolerance for chaos decreases. Environments filled with constant noise, drama, or urgency feel draining rather than stimulating. You naturally gravitate toward order, simplicity, and depth. This does not shrink your life, it refines it. Another subtle but meaningful shift is the way you experience motivation. Motivation becomes steady rather than emotional. You are not driven by bursts of inspiration followed by exhaustion. You operate from commitment rather than impulse. This steadiness supports sustainable progress. You may also begin to notice a refinement in how you measure success. Instead of focusing only on visible milestones, you pay attention to internal consistency. How calmly you handle stress. How clearly you communicate. How reliably you follow through. These indicators reflect real growth even when external results take time to appear. As your internal structure strengthens, creativity often increases. With less inner noise, ideas flow more freely. Problem-solving becomes more adaptive. You see connections more clearly. Creativity expresses itself not only through art, but through leadership, communication, and strategy. Another important change is how you respond to uncertainty. Instead of trying to eliminate it immediately, you allow it to inform you. You observe patterns. You wait for clarity without anxiety. This patience improves judgment and prevents impulsive decisions. You may also experience a quiet confidence emerging. Not loud or performative, but steady and grounded. You trust your direction without needing constant reassurance. This confidence allows you to remain consistent even when feedback is absent or delayed. Your relationship with rest also evolves. Rest becomes restoration rather than escape. You rest to sustain clarity, not to avoid responsibility. This rhythm of effort and renewal protects long-term stability and prevents burnout. Another shift occurs in how you engage with comparison. You become less concerned with how others are moving or what they are achieving. You recognize that your path has its own rhythm. This independence reduces unnecessary pressure and supports authenticity. You may notice that your inner dialogue becomes kinder and more realistic. Extremes of self-criticism soften. Inflated expectations normalize. You operate from balanced self-assessment rather than emotional extremes. This stabilizes motivation and reduces inner conflict. As this activation integrates, your sense of responsibility becomes clearer. You understand what is yours to influence and what is not. You stop absorbing other people's emotional burdens or expectations unnecessarily. This boundary clarity preserves energy and strengthens focus. Another sign of maturation is increased comfort with pauses. Stillness no longer feels like stagnation. Silence no longer feels threatening. You understand rhythm and timing. You allow recovery to support clarity. You may also notice that your tolerance for misalignment decreases. Situations that once felt acceptable now feel subtly wrong. You adjust sooner instead of enduring longer. This sensitivity reflects alignment sharpening rather than judgment increasing. As internal reliability strengthens, external trust often follows naturally. People experience you as steadier, clearer, and more consistent. This influence is not forced. It emerges through coherence. Royal power expresses itself not through dominance, but through stewardship. Stewardship of energy, attention, emotion, and action. This stewardship builds credibility within yourself first, and then outward over time. As this second part settles, understand that activation is not about sudden elevation. It is about sustained integrity. Each aligned choice reinforces self-governance. Each thoughtful response strengthens coherence. And through this steady practice, everything truly begins to change. Not dramatically, but durably. As this steady self-governance continues to mature, you may begin to notice a deeper shift in how you experience personal authority. Authority no longer feels like something external that must be earned, defended, or borrowed from approval. It becomes internal, lived, and quiet. You trust your judgment because it has proven consistent over time. You no longer second-guess every decision or seek reassurance for each step. This does not make you closed or rigid. It makes you anchored. And from that anchoring, flexibility becomes possible without instability. Internal authority changes how you relate to uncertainty. Instead of treating the unknown as a threat that must be eliminated immediately, you learn to move within uncertainty without losing balance. You stop demanding perfect clarity before acting. You understand that clarity often emerges through engagement, observation, and adjustment, rather than waiting for guarantees. This reduces paralysis and increases confidence, not because you suddenly know everything, but because you trust your ability to adapt intelligently as information unfolds. Another noticeable transformation is how you respond to pressure. Pressure no longer automatically creates urgency or reactivity. It creates space for assessment. You pause, you observe, you choose. This pause becomes one of your greatest strengths. It prevents unnecessary conflict, impulsive decisions, and emotional exhaustion. When reactions slow down, discernment sharpens. You stop being pulled by external intensity and start moving from internal clarity. Your emotional landscape continues to stabilize. Highs become less frantic. Lows become less consuming. Emotions still move through you fully, but they no longer dictate your direction. You are no longer governed by momentary feelings. This is not emotional suppression. It is emotional maturity. You feel without being ruled. This balance supports healthier relationships, clearer communication, and stronger resilience under stress. As coherence strengthens, your attention becomes increasingly intentional. You recognize how valuable your focus truly is. You stop scattering energy across too many directions. You become more selective with what you engage, what you consume, and what you allow to influence your inner world. This selectivity is not isolation. It is stewardship. You are protecting the quality of your mental and emotional environment. Your relationship with expectations also evolves. You release standards that were driven by comparison, fear, or old narratives about what success should look like. Goals become more authentic and aligned with your actual values rather than external pressure. This reduces inner friction and supports sustainability. You no longer chase outcomes that do not nourish your integrity. Ambition becomes refined. You still desire growth, but you are no longer willing to sacrifice stability for speed. You recognize that rapid progress without structure often collapses. Steady progress with coherence compounds. This perspective shifts how you evaluate opportunities. You choose what supports longevity rather than what promises immediate excitement. Your relationship with conflict changes as well. You no longer feel obligated to engage in every disagreement or defend every position. You choose your battles wisely. Silence becomes a tool of clarity rather than avoidance. You understand that not every reaction deserves expression. This restraint conserves energy and preserves focus. Intuition also becomes more refined. Guidance feels quieter, more precise, and less dramatic. Instead of constant signals or emotional urgency, you receive subtle impressions that feel grounded and timely. Trusting this quieter guidance deepens confidence and reduces dependence on external validation. Setbacks are processed differently now. Instead of personalizing them or interpreting them as failure, you treat them as information. You adjust without emotional collapse. You remain steady while refining strategy. This adaptability keeps momentum alive, even when conditions are imperfect. You may begin measuring progress in new ways. Instead of focusing only on visible milestones, you notice internal consistency. How quickly you recover from stress, how calmly you handle uncertainty, how clearly you communicate boundaries. These internal markers reflect true maturity even when external recognition takes time to appear. Mental noise continues to soften. You spend less time replaying the past or projecting into the future. Presence becomes more natural. This spaciousness supports creativity, insight, and emotional balance. You think more clearly because fewer internal voices are competing for attention. Simplicity becomes more attractive than complexity. You prefer clarity over excess. You choose depth over volume in commitments, conversations, and pursuits. This simplification does not shrink your life. It strengthens it. Gratitude also matures. You appreciate progress without inflating it. You recognize challenges without dramatizing them. This balanced perspective stabilizes identity and prevents emotional extremes. Your tolerance for misalignment decreases. Situations that once felt acceptable now feel subtly uncomfortable. You adjust sooner rather than enduring longer. This sensitivity reflects refinement rather than judgment. Boundaries feel natural rather than forced. You communicate limits calmly. You honor your energy without guilt. This self-respect reinforces stability and reduces internal conflict. Timing awareness improves. You become more sensitive to when movement is supported and when stillness preserves clarity. You stop forcing momentum and begin cooperating with rhythm. This cooperation increases effectiveness and reduces frustration. Confidence becomes quieter but stronger. You do not need to announce growth or seek constant reassurance. You simply live it. This authenticity strengthens trust within yourself and with others. This phase is not about dramatic breakthroughs, it is about consolidation. You are reinforcing patterns that support alignment so they become automatic rather than effortful. Automatic alignment frees mental and emotional energy for deeper creativity and contribution. You are learning to hold clarity without rigidity, confidence without ego, and responsibility without pressure. These balances define sustainable growth. As this consolidation continues, you may realize that what once felt like activation is now becoming normal. Not something you analyze constantly, but something you embody through how you choose, respond, and move through ordinary moments. Royal power reveals itself not through spectacle, but through stability. and stability quietly reshapes every area it touches. As this stability becomes lived rather than conceptual, another layer of maturity begins to take shape: stewardship of influence. You start recognizing that your presence, tone, and consistency affect more than just your own internal state. They shape environments, conversations, and dynamics in subtle ways. This awareness does not create pressure. It creates care. You become more intentional about how you enter spaces, how you speak, and how you hold responsibility, not because you fear impact, but because you respect it. You may notice that your sense of leadership evolves. Leadership no longer feels like directing or controlling. It feels like modeling. You demonstrate steadiness instead of demanding it. You embody clarity instead of explaining it endlessly. Others may begin to respond differently to you, not because you assert authority, but because your consistency creates trust. This kind of influence grows quietly and sustainably. Another shift occurs in how you relate to accountability. You no longer avoid it or over-identify with it. You see accountability as feedback rather than judgment. When something does not go as intended, you adjust without self-attack. When something succeeds, you acknowledge effort without inflating ego. This balanced accountability keeps growth grounded and prevents emotional extremes. Your relationship with structure also deepens. Structure no longer feels restrictive. It feels supportive. Routines become containers that protect clarity rather than rules that limit freedom. You understand that freedom is not the absence of structure, but the presence of self-chosen structure that aligns with your values. This perspective allows you to maintain consistency without rigidity. As stewardship strengthens, you become more selective with commitments. You recognize that every agreement carries energetic responsibility. You stop overcommitting out of obligation or fear of missing out. You choose commitments that match your capacity and direction. This selectivity preserves quality of focus and prevents dilution of effort. You may also notice that your sense of personal rhythm becomes clearer. You understand when you work best, when you need rest, and when reflection supports insight. You stop forcing productivity during periods that require integration. This respect for rhythm improves sustainability and reduces unnecessary friction. Another important development is how you relate to feedback from others. You can receive it without defensiveness and without dependency. You evaluate it thoughtfully. You integrate what aligns and release what does not, without resentment. Feedback becomes information rather than identity. This openness accelerates learning while protecting stability. Your communication continues to refine. You speak with simplicity and precision. You avoid unnecessary explanation. You trust that consistency communicates more than persuasion. You listen with presence rather than agenda. Conversations become more constructive because you are no longer seeking validation or control through them. You may also notice a deeper sense of emotional economy. You do not spend emotional energy on situations that do not deserve it. You conserve your emotional bandwidth for what truly matters. This does not make you detached. It makes you focused. Emotional energy becomes a resource you steward rather than a force that drains you. As inner reliability strengthens, your sense of trust deepens. Not only trust in outcomes, but trust in process and in yourself. You know that you can navigate complexity without losing coherence. This trust reduces the need to micromanage life and increases openness to adaptation. Another quiet shift is how you experience identity. You no longer cling tightly to labels, roles, or narratives about who you are. You allow identity to remain flexible, informed by behavior rather than image. This fluidity supports growth and prevents stagnation. You may also notice that your tolerance for superficial engagement decreases. You prefer depth over surface-level interaction. You value quality over quantity in relationships, information, and experiences. This refinement does not isolate you. It clarifies where you invest. Your relationship with uncertainty continues to mature. You no longer rush to resolve ambiguity just to relieve discomfort. You allow uncertainty to reveal information over time. This patience improves judgment and prevents premature decisions. And through this calm restraint, choices become more accurate and sustainable.